15th episode of Nature Aventure Survie, the podcast.
Nature Aventure Survie.
Let's have a talk again with Paul Kirtley, who is a bushcraft instructor in the United Kingdom for Frontier Bushcraft.
Ça va, nous allons finir par mourir de soif sur ce fichu rafio.
Si ça continue, capitaine, nous serons bientôt au régime du docteur Bombard.
Ouais.
Wilson! Wilson!
There's often a common confusion between two words, bushcraft and survival. For instance, in France, we don't have bushcraft school yet. We just have survival school. What is the difference?
I think there are a couple of differences. I think the key difference is one of context, not so much content. It's more context. So, you know, one of the examples I use, and people listening to this may have, if they've heard me speak before, they may have heard me use this example before, but I think it's a good one, and it's one that most people will be familiar with and one that they can relate to. So, for example, bow drill or bow and drill, friction firelighting. I think most people who will be interested in listening to this will understand what I mean by that. You're taking materials, you're taking natural materials, you're taking a particular type of wood, and you're fashioning it, you're carving it, and you're turning it into a very, very simple mechanical device which can be used to create heat via friction, and then you generate an ember, and then that can be taken into a bird's nest type of tinder bundle and blown into flames, and then those flames can be used to light your fire. And it's a very reliable method of lighting fire as long as you're well practiced at it. And it gives you the most mechanical advantage, and it gives you the most choice in terms of resources that you use to try and make the friction parts of the set. That's why we teach it as a baseline foundational skill. And if you're doing that, if you're going out with your friends or on your own, and you make up a camp and you then light a fire that way, you go and get the materials, you make a set, and you can do it quite quickly if you're good at it. You know, one of the guys, well, some of the guys who work for me at Frontier Bushcraft, they have a little bit of a competition, and they start with nothing but a knife and a piece of string, and they have to go into the forest, find the right materials, make the bow drill set, and make a fire, make flames. The quickest any of them can do it is about 18 minutes, which sounds like a long time if you've not tried to do it. But if you've tried bow drill, starting with nothing and going out and ending up with flame within 18 minutes is pretty fast. So that is the skill set. And now if you're just doing that because you want a fire, it's a bushcraft skill. You know, you want a fire, end of the day, you've got a camp, you know, you're making a fire so you can boil your water, you can cook your food. It's a bushcraft skill. It's just part of your skills in the bush. If, on the other hand, you're making a canoe journey, particularly in a remote place where you can't walk to a road, you can't get mobile phone signal, you're paddling, and which is the case in many parts of Canada and also parts of northern United States, you're paddling down a rapid. If you're the only boat in the group, so you might be two people in one boat, which is typically how you might travel, because it's efficient rather than two people in two boats, you go down some rapids, you capsize, your boat turns over, it goes down the river and you can't retrieve it. It could be pinned on a rock, which happens sometimes. But you typically, if you fall out on a river, you can get to the side of the river. It's harder if you're on a lake because you're going to be further away from the shore. But if you've fallen on a river, typically you're going to get to, if you don't get stuck on a rock or something, you're going to get to the side. So typically what would happen if you lost your boat, you'd find yourself on the bank of the river, but then you've only got what you're wearing. You've got your buoyancy aid or your life jacket and your clothes and what you might have in your pockets. Then if you then use fire by friction to light a fire, you're cold and you're wet and you're going to have to spend the night in the forest at least, then it becomes more of a survival skill, because you're preventing something which may eventually kill you, hypothermia. You may already, you don't have to spend a lot of time in water, particularly in the spring. If you're canoeing in May, that water is going to be snow melt. It's going to be very, very cold. It hasn't had the whole summer to warm up. So if you spend any time in that water, you're going to be very, very cold. So if you're using that same skill, the bow drill, it's then a survival skill, because it's preventing you from dying, basically, or becoming really susceptible to the cold. If, on the other hand, you have some friends around to your house, you go into the back garden or the backyard, you're having a barbecue, and some of your friends say, "Hey, Alban," or "Hey, Paul, you teach bushcraft, you can do friction firelighting, can't you?" And you say yes, and they say, "Well, would you show us?" And you have some materials. It might not be the same materials you would use in the forest, but there might be some wood in your yard or your garden. You make a set, or maybe you've even got a set left from doing a demonstration or something, and you show them the skill, and they're, you're all having a couple of beers or a glass of wine or whatever, and they enjoy watching it, and they all cheer and give you a clap when you get the fire. That's more of a party trick. Yeah, but it's the same skill. So it can be a bushcraft skill, it can be a survival skill, it can be a party trick that it impresses your friends. The skill is the same, but the context, the situation you're in, is very, very different. And so that's not true of every skill, but many of the skills that we discuss, is this a bushcraft skill or is this a survival skill? It's the same skill, and it's down to the person being able to apply that skill in the context they find themselves. I think the difference with survival then is also about the mental side of things, the psychology, the situation that you're going to find yourself in. Having to apply a particular skill is very different. There's more pressure, there's more stress. You may have a friend who is cold or injured. You may be cold or injured yourself. You don't know when you might be found. You don't have all the equipment that you normally have. There are many, many mental stresses, and I think psychology is a large part of what makes people succeed or fail in difficult situations in the outdoors that you might otherwise term as a survival situation. So I think the psychology of the application is different, and I think the context of the application is different. And then there are also some skills that within bushcraft that you would never, in a modern context, you would never end up applying in a survival situation. So what I mean by that is, if you look at history, if you think about native peoples in North America, and the reason I choose them is because there is some record of how they lived relatively recently. It would have been similar for our ancestors in Europe, but there is no historical record other than an archaeological record of how we might have lived at the end of the last ice age, for example, 8,000 years ago. But from those archaeological artifacts, it seems that there were many commonalities in terms of people hunting with bows, in terms of carving artifacts, in terms of the materials that were useful to them, whether it was reindeer antlers, people made spear throwers, what are often referred to as atlatls. The hunting equipment was similar, the fauna, the animals were similar, the plants were similar. You can kind of assume that there were similar ways of living. It's just that we don't have access to that. If you look at people, native peoples in North America, when Western Europeans arrived, they recorded how those people were living. Anthropologists studied them. There are even early photographs, latterly, of how people were living off the land and close to land in North America. So we've got a good understanding of how they did that. And the thing there is that from our perspective now, if we were teaching those skills, many of those skills would be considered bushcraft skills. We might be looking at tanning a moose hide, or making a bow, or foraging for wild foods, or making a teepee with birch bark on the outside. That would all be considered bushcraft skill. But if you look at those people, they were living off the land. They were surviving 24/7, 365 days a year using those skills. So all those skills for them were survival skills. If they didn't do them, if they didn't make pemmican in the autumn, they didn't survive the winter. If they didn't hunt moose to get the moose hides, they didn't have clothes. They were survival skills. So again, I think the context is very, very important. And I think from a modern perspective, a lot of the basic skills, there's complete crossover. If you're teaching somebody to light a fire, it can be a survival skill or a bushcraft skill. But I think most people are not going to go out for long enough and be living from the land for long enough for many of what used to be bushcraft skills, what used to be survival skills, but now considered bushcraft skills, for them to be survival skills. Most people who get lost in the outdoors these days are rescued within 72 hours. Many people worry about starving to death, but you're not going to starve to death in 3 days. All you really need is to have some sort of shelter so you don't get too hot or too cold. You need for somebody to be able to find you, so you need to be seen, and you need to be able to see people searching for you. You need to be confident that somebody's going to come and look for you, so that means telling somebody where you're going before you go. Lighting a fire might be helpful in terms of staying warm or signaling to people, but as long as you're confident that somebody's going to find you, you basically need to have some sort of shelter, be confident they're looking for you, get some water perhaps, and just wait for somebody to come and find you. That's very, very different from living in the forest 365 days a year. So what's considered survival now is very different to maybe what was considered survival 400 or 500 years ago in North America and 8,000 years ago in Europe. So I think, to a certain extent, these boundaries are academic. The important thing to remember is that you have the skills, and also the other important thing to remember is that the psychology in a difficult situation, in a stressful situation, in a survival situation is going to be very different to when you just choose to use them in your leisure time. I think those are the important distinctions to make for us as modern people. That's a long answer, but...
That's a perfect answer. And don't you think that there's a difference between a bushcraft school and survival school, where bushcraft schools rely more on natural resources, and, well, it might be just my feeling, but I think that survival schools are more relying on gear. I mean, space blankets, ferro rod, etc.
Well, yeah, I think you can equip yourself. I mean, if you look at it, it's all equipment. And I think even if you're teaching bushcraft, unless you're going to go out completely naked, then you're still choosing what equipment you take with you. And I think you're still choosing, I would consider clothing part of your equipment. You're still choosing to go out with certain boots and certain clothing. So again, I think it's a certain academic distinction. But yes, there are certain skills that might be taught within a survival context that maybe are not emphasized within bushcraft so much. But equally, if I teach somebody about principles of shelter, that one of the first things that I will talk to people about is heat loss to the environment. If you're building a shelter from natural materials, or if you're making a shelter using a survival blanket, and you're cutting up a survival bag to make an improvised tarp, or whatever you're doing, or a lean-to with a fire in front of it, the mechanisms by which you lose heat to the environment, convection, conduction, evaporation, radiation, respiration, they're the same And you can be making a shelter from completely natural materials, or you can be making a shelter from a combination of natural materials and what you have in your rucksack, or making a shelter just from what you have in your rucksack. But the ways that you lose heat to the environment are the same, and your understanding of cutting off those mechanisms needs to be the same. So yes, you might say it can be, from a survival perspective, it's useful to take a survival blanket or a tarp or a group shelter in your day bag in case you need shelter, because it's difficult to make a shelter from natural materials. But that's something I teach on some of my courses. So I will teach people how to make a shelter completely from natural materials. So we have a one-day course called a Bushcraft and Survival Foundation course, and one of the principles there is that a lot of the skills are the same. It's just the application, the context is different. But what we will do is we will have the people on that course make a shelter using just sticks and leaves from the forest. And there might be 10 people on the course, and it takes them half an hour to build this shelter. So you say, okay, well, 10 people, half an hour, that's 5 man-hours of work. And they're not building a shelter that's big enough for 10 people. They're building maybe a one-man shelter or a two-person shelter, but they're doing it as a group because it's only a one-day course, just to accelerate the process so they can build a shelter and see what it looks like and see how it works, but in a short period of time. They understand that that's 5 hours of work for one person. Then you say, right, okay, here's a tarp, and this is how you put it up. Or here's an orange survival bag, and you can get in it like this and use it, and you can stay quite warm. Or you can cut it down 2 edges and make an improvised tarp from it. Or you can make an improvised lean-to and have a fire in front of it, and you can put that up in minutes. They value having that piece of equipment in their bag more than they would have done if you just said, make sure you have this in your bag. Because they understand it takes 5 hours to build a good shelter without that thing. And then also if you say, well, if you're out for a day walk, if you're out for a hike on your own, and you don't get back home or back to the car or back to where you should be before nightfall, it's going to be quite late in the day before you decide that you're not going to get home. That means that you then, maybe an hour before darkness, you're starting to build a shelter. You don't have 5 hours to build it. So again, they understand that they need to put something up quickly. So yeah, I still think teaching people the bushcraft way of doing something makes them understand the modern survival way of doing things better. They appreciate that piece of equipment more because they understand how difficult it would be without it. So I still think the two inform each other very, very well. And I think, again, I don't like to have a real distinction between one and the other. I think, we're all modern people that are choosing to go into the outdoors, and we can choose what we take with us. And I think we have to value both sides of the coin, as it were, because they are quite closely related. But you're absolutely right. There are things that you would do in a survival situation that given the choice, you wouldn't necessarily do. I've spent time, without any sleeping equipment, trying to sleep next to a fire in the rain with very little shelter. It's unpleasant. You wouldn't choose to do that. But just getting that fire going keeps you alive. It keeps you warm. It keeps you from getting too cold. And so, yeah, what you will do in a survival situation just to stay alive is maybe a little bit more extreme than what you would choose to do if you were applying your bushcraft skills. And you are absolutely right that, as we've said already, at the core of bushcraft is a knowledge and understanding of natural materials. I think there's a danger in teaching survival skills just from the point of view of being reliant upon equipment, though. I think the best survival instructors and the people who are best equipped to deal with survival situations in terms of their physical skill set are the ones whose bushcraft is the best. If you look at the best survival manuals, there's a lot of what we might call bushcraft in there, because they're going beyond just making sure that you have a ferro rod and a space blanket in your pocket. They're saying, they're showing you a lot of the natural resources you can use as well for different aspects of what you might need to do in a survival situation. And as I say, that then goes back to context. That might be exactly the same skill set and resource set that you're using in a bushcraft context, if you like. So I think the boundaries get blurred very quickly, but you're right, there is probably an overemphasis on equipment in basic survival training, and not enough emphasis on natural resources as well, because at the end of the day, both can be used in that sort of situation.
And talking about equipment, what do you think of the gear and kits that are available in shops or on the internet and labeled as survival or survival gears?
Well, some of it's some of it is very valid. I think, if I'm hiking in the mountains, I will take, at least a survival bag with me. A heavy gauge orange plastic survival bag that I can get into and use as an improvised shelter. That's a really, really important piece of survival equipment. If you look at your priorities in a survival situation, your top priority is, once you get past medical issues, so first aid and medical issues, your priority is protection from the environment. And that's whether it's, most of the time we're either going to get too hot or too cold if we just sit still in an environment. And so we need to protect ourselves from the environment, whether that's to avoid hypothermia or hyperthermia. And shelter is the first thing we really need to think about, other than our clothing. And so, things like that, survival blankets or blizzard bags or those sorts of things that you might take with you are an important piece of survival equipment. There's a lot of other stuff, though, big survival knives and those sorts of things, which, I find it interesting. People go for hikes in the woods in France or Germany or in the UK, and they've got a big survival knife with them. It's like, well, what are you going to survive with that? If you hurt you're on a day hike, you hurt your ankle. What are you going to do with that knife? It's kind of gimmicky, and I think there is a lot of gimmickry. There's a commercialization of the outdoors in general. It's not just bushcraft. We see it in bushcraft. A lot of equipment is sold as bushcraft equipment, and I think that's completely ridiculous because, as we've already said a couple of times, Alban, bushcraft really is at its core is an understanding of nature and a skill set that you have in your muscles and a knowledge that you have in your head. Any tools are a bonus. Most people will carry a knife, but even a small folding knife is going to be very, very useful to you. It's about going back to the Hadza. They don't have great tools, but they've got great knowledge, and they manage to live from that environment. So, it's bushcraft isn't about equipment. Bushcraft is about nature. It's about your understanding and your practical skills. But we still see a commercialization. We see things labeled as bushcraft, this, bushcraft that, and it's the same with survival. And I think the danger with survival equipment is that it really does, if people are buying it because they think it's going to save their life in a difficult situation, it needs to be good. And the thing that worries me is that I've tried lots of different things over the years, different survival kits, and a lot of the things in there are quite cheap. They don't work very well. They break, they bend, they don't last very long. So you've got things packed in a package and they degrade over time, and they don't, matches don't work, or fuel blocks dissolve, and these things don't last very well. And if they're cheap, it's just exploitative. And I think if you're gonna put together a survival kit, you're much better off choosing, really, really thinking about the situation that you're going to find yourself in, and be realistic. Yeah, if you're going on a mountain hike, do you really need a survival fishing kit? No, you don't, because there are no fish there, unless you're going to be in an area where there are some lakes that you can use, or rivers where you can fish. You don't need a survival fishing kit. And then going back to what we said before, most people, particularly in Western Europe, if they get lost, and it's also the same for North America, it's the same for Australia and Tasmania, if somebody knows where you're going, if you've left word of where you're going and when you're expected back, most people statistically are rescued within 3 or 4 days, within 72 hours most of the time. You don't need to feed yourself in that time. You rather than packing a fishing kit, you'd be better off packing some extra, protein bars and cereal bars and some food that you can nibble at while you're waiting to be rescued. That's just taking a realistic approach. So if you're going to put together a survival kit for the environment that you're going to, and it typically needs to be environment specific, think about what risks you really face, objectively, and what you can do about it in that environment. A machete is no good above the tree line, but people still carry things where they don't need them and where they're no use to them. So be realistic about what you can do. Head torch and means of signalling are much more important in some environments than a cutting tool. In other environments, a cutting tool is the number one thing you should be packing. In the northern forest, an axe is really, really important. In tropical areas, a machete or parang is really, really important. So you've got to contextualize the survival equipment. Just buying survival gimmicks off the shelf won't do you a lot. And then you also need to practice, train with the equipment, understand how it works, and have tried to use things. It's much better to it's like first aid training or martial arts training or anything. If you've never tried it before you're really stressed, it's probably not going to work. Much better to train in these things and practice with the equipment and become familiar with it, and then if you ever need to use it, you can use it. So I am a little bit skeptical of all this stuff that's labelled as survival or bushcraft, because at the end of the day, you have to be a lot more objective about choosing your equipment properly. But that's just a symptom of the world that we live in. Everything is compartmentalized, everything is branded, everything is commercialized, and that can be good in some respects because it gets equipment to you that you maybe wouldn't otherwise have access to. But generally, if you look at the outdoors, whether it's mountaineering or mountain biking or canoeing or bushcraft or survival skills or archery, there is a product that you can buy to do something, to do anything that you can think of. There's a product that will solve some problem, and often they're problems you didn't even know you had in the first place. It's not just survival or bushcraft, it's right across any outdoor activity that you look at. Fishing is a classic example as well. The fish haven't changed in hundreds of years, but the fishing equipment is changing all the time, and it's really there. A friend of mine is a big fisherman, and he says most fishing equipment is designed to catch the fisherman, not to catch the fish. And I think it's the same. It's the same in survival. It's the same in bushcraft.
Yeah, and you said it well. You have to train. This is the end of the second part of our interview with Paul Kirtley. Paul Kirtley, you can find him on his website, paulkirtley.co.uk. And you can find us at natureaventuresurvie.blogspot.fr or on our Facebook page, Nature Aventure Survie, and on our Instagram and YouTube channel, etc. Have a good day, have a good bushcraft.